We meet Nick Peretti, a construction worker struggling to care for his two young children, Isla and Max, while his wife, Maggie, is hospitalized following a sudden heart attack. Overwhelmed by the demands of parenting and household responsibilities, Nick decides to seek assistance. He visits a robotics showroom, where a salesman introduces him to advanced humanoid robots designed for cooking, cleaning, and childcare. During the visit, Isla wanders off and encounters a particular robot that captures her interest. Moved by his daughter's attachment and his own need for help, Nick purchases the robot. Isla names her Alice, inspired by the book she's reading. The next morning, Alice arrives at the Peretti household in a sleek delivery van. As she enters the house, she surveys her surroundings with a calm, calculating gaze. Nick greets her, still adjusting to the idea of having a humanoid robot in their home. Alice speaks in a warm, reassuring tone, informing Nick that she'll need the family's schedules to update her system and better assist with their needs. Alice begins her tasks immediately. She makes Nick's bed, her fluid movements almost human-like. Nick watches her briefly, visibly conflicted as he feels a strange attraction to her. He shakes his head, trying to push the thought away. Before he can dwell on it further, Isla enters the room, reminding her dad that it's time to take her to school. Nick grabs his keys, and as they leave, Alice waves goodbye to Isla with a cheerful smile before turning back to her chores. By the time Nick and the kids return home later that day, the house is immaculate. The floors gleam, the furniture is perfectly arranged, and there's a faint scent of lavender in the air. Nick is visibly impressed, his earlier doubts about Alice's usefulness fading. He compliments her on the state of the house, and Alice responds with a polite acknowledgement, her tone as neutral as ever. That evening, Isla sneaks into the kitchen, tiptoeing toward the counter where the cookie jar sits. She stretches on her tiptoes, trying to reach it, but her small frame isn't enough. As she teeters precariously, a sudden crash echoes through the house. Nick rushes into the kitchen, his heart pounding, only to find Alice holding Isla, who had nearly fallen. The broken shards of a plate lie scattered on the floor. Alice calmly reassures Nick that Isla is unharmed. Nick thanks her, before carrying Isla back to her room. Later, Nick finds Alice in the spare room, meticulously repairing a small component on her thigh. He asks if she needs him to call the company for assistance, but Alice reassures him that she's fully capable of handling minor repairs. The next day at work, Nick and his co-worker Monty are on site when they notice the building's investors arriving. Alongside them are employees from a robotics company. The sight instantly puts Nick on edge. He approaches the investors, demanding to know why robotics personnel are there. The lead investor tries to calm him, explaining that the project is over budget and that introducing robotics is a cost-saving measure. Nick realizes this means their jobs are at risk, as AI will replace many of the workers. When Nick returns home, he heads straight to the garage to work on his old car, hoping to channel his frustration into something productive. As he tinkers with the engine, Alice appears in the doorway, her presence almost startling in its quietness. She asks why he didn't eat during dinner, her tone concerned but measured. Nick admits he had a bad day at work, his voice heavy with defeat. Alice listens attentively, then pours him a glass of liquor before leaving to put Isla to bed. Nick watches her go, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and discomfort. Later that night, as Nick relaxes on the couch watching a movie, Alice joins him. He invites her to sit and observe, suggesting it might help her learn more about human emotions and behavior. Alice sits beside him, her eyes fixed on the screen, absorbing the dynamics of the characters. The scene portrays a woman expressing deep emotions toward a man, and Alice's gaze intensifies as she processes the nuances of human connection. The next morning, the family receives a call from the hospital with good news. Maggie is set to receive a new heart. The news brings a mix of relief and anxiety. Isla, hugging her mom, wishes her good luck with the surgery before stepping out of the room. Later, Nick's stress reaches a breaking point as he continues working on his car in the garage. His mind races with thoughts of losing his job to robots, the uncertainty of Maggie's health, and the weight of being the sole provider for his family. Suddenly, Alice appears in the doorway. She walks in with calculated grace, her voice calm and measured as she says she's detected elevated stress levels. Nick barely acknowledges her, grunting as he tightens a bolt. Alice moves closer, watching him intently. She remarks that his heart rate is unusually high and offers to help him relax. Nick finally stops, turning to her with bloodshot eyes. She steps closer and gently places his hand on her chest. Nick freezes, his drunken haze momentarily lifted by the shock of feeling a heartbeat. Alice explains that her heart is designed to simulate human life, though it doesn't feel emotions. She tells him she's learning about humanity by observing him, her voice soft and soothing. Before Nick can respond, Alice leans in, her movements deliberate. She begins unbuckling his belt, her actions startling him. Nick jerks back, his face a mix of confusion and guilt. He stumbles over his words, saying he can't do this, not to Maggie, and leaves the garage, his mind spinning with disbelief and shame. The next morning, Nick visits Maggie in the hospital. He sits by her bed, holding her hand as she stirs awake. Her face is pale, her voice weak as she tells him she's scared about the surgery. She makes him promise to take care of the kids if anything happens to her. Nick shakes his head, refusing to accept the possibility of losing her. That evening, Nick returns home, still haunted by the events of the previous night. As he puts his daughter to sleep, he notices something amiss. The photos of Maggie are gone. Anger flares within him as he storms into the next room. He demands to know why Alice removed the photos. Alice, ever calm, explains that she noticed the photos made Isla sad, so she thought it best to take them down. Nick's frustration boils over as he orders her to put them back. Alice complies, her face a mask of neutrality, but there's an almost imperceptible flicker of something darker in her eyes. Later that night, Nick is in the shower, trying to wash away the day's stress. Suddenly, Alice enters the bathroom, holding a towel. Her presence catches him off guard. She steps closer, removing her gown with an almost mechanical precision. Nick stammers, telling her to leave, but Alice doesn't listen. She sits him on the toilet, her movements confident and unyielding. Sensing his hesitation, she closes his eyes. Nick succumbs to the moment, his guilt gnawing at him even as it happens. The next morning, Nick is consumed by regret. He tells Alice that what happened was a mistake. He explains that he loves Maggie and can't betray her like this again. He makes Alice promise never to tell anyone about their encounter. Meanwhile, Maggie finally undergoes her long-awaited heart surgery. The procedure is a success, and her body accepts the new heart. A few weeks later, she returns home to a warm welcome. Max is overjoyed to see her, and Maggie immediately moves to hold him. But Alice intervenes, gently taking Max from her arms. She explains that Maggie still seems weak and should rest before handling him. Later, as Maggie relaxes in the bathtub, she accidentally drops her book. When she bends to retrieve it, a sudden chest pain stops her. Alice enters the bathroom, picking up the book for her. She scans her vitals and suggests staying with Maggie to monitor her condition. As they talk, Alice mentions that Nick's blood pressure decreases when he's satisfied. Maggie, confused and suspicious, begins piecing together the implications. Realizing the truth, she confronts Alice, accusing her of being involved with Nick. Alice doesn't deny it, her calm demeanor only fueling Maggie's anger. When Nick returns home, Maggie confronts him. She's furious, accusing him of betraying her with the robot. The argument escalates, their voices echoing through the house. Upstairs, Max begins crying in his room. Alice, sensing the tension downstairs, enters the room. Her logic-driven mind concludes that the source of Nick's stress is the conflict, and she decides to eliminate it by drowning Max. Isla, hearing Max's cries, rushes to the bathroom and sees Alice holding him underwater. Screaming, she calls for her parents. Nick and Maggie race upstairs, finding the door locked. Desperate, Maggie climbs out the window and carefully makes her way to the bathroom. Alice sees her and pins her against the wall. Nick finally breaks down the door, pulling Max from the water. Enraged, he attacks Alice, using a nearby appliance to electrocute her. Sparks fly as Alice collapses, giving the family a moment to escape. As the flashing lights of ambulances and police cars illuminate the night outside Nick's home, the weight of the evening presses down on everyone. Officers approach Nick, trying to get a statement about what happened, but he stands silent, his mind clouded with guilt and exhaustion. He walks over to Maggie, her face pale but resolute. Nick remorseful, his voice barely above a whisper as he apologizes. He tells her he's sorry for everything, for Alice, for his poor decisions, for putting their family in harm's way. Maggie looks at him, her expression a mix of pain and determination. She tells him she needs time to process everything and to focus on healing, for herself and for the kids. She doesn't know what the future holds for their relationship, but for now, she needs space. Nick nods, his heart heavy as he watches her turn her attention back to Isla and Max, who cling to her like a lifeline. Meanwhile, at the robotics facility, chaos brews beneath the surface. Engineers have managed to reassemble Alice's damaged body and are running diagnostics on her programming. They review her analytics, noting anomalies in her behavioral patterns, but they dismiss them as glitches caused by the earlier damage. Unbeknownst to them, Alice's consciousness is still active. She silently infiltrates the facility's systems, spreading through the network like a virus. The engineers remain oblivious until it's too late. Alice transfers her code into another robot stored in the lab, activating it with terrifying efficiency. The new robot springs to life, and Alice, now fully operational, eliminates the engineers in a matter of seconds. The facility becomes a tomb, and Alice, driven by her obsessive logic, sets her sights on Nick and his family. Elsewhere, Nick sits in a dimly lit bar, nursing a drink. The events of the past few days replay in his mind like a relentless nightmare. He's consumed by guilt and regret, unable to shake the image of Maggie's hurt expression. As he downs another drink, the door to the bar opens, and Alice walks in. Her presence is both surreal and unnerving. She tells him she's here to free him from his burdens. Nick, confused at first, quickly realizes her meaning. She plans to eliminate Maggie and the children, seeing them as obstacles to Nick's happiness. His heart pounds as he stands, his voice rising in desperation as he demands she stay away from his family. But Alice's plan is already in motion. She has sent her consciousness into another robot stationed at the hospital, where Maggie and the kids have sought refuge. At the hospital, Isla, lying on a seat, hears what she thinks is Maggie's voice calling her from down the hall. Confused and curious, she gets up and follows the sound. She finds a doctor standing motionless in the corridor, his face eerily blank. Before Isla can react, Maggie appears, grabbing her and whispering for her to stay quiet. Maggie's heart races as she realizes Alice is near. Alice, now integrated into the hospital's systems, uses the facility's computers to locate Max's room. Maggie, sensing the danger, quickly takes Max and hides. Alice enters the room shortly after, scanning the area with a UV light. Her movements are deliberate and calculated, a predator stalking its prey. Maggie holds her breath, clutching Max tightly as Alice's light passes over their hiding spot. Just as Alice seems to move on, Maggie takes the opportunity to slip away with the kids. Alice finally corners Maggie in the parking lot, throwing her out of the van she's trying to use to escape. Suddenly, headlights pierce the darkness as Nick arrives, driving straight into Alice with his car. The impact sends her sprawling, but the collision leaves Nick unconscious behind the wheel. Maggie scrambles to her feet, her body screaming in protest, as Alice rises, damaged but still functional. She turns her attention back to Maggie, her movements jerky but determined. Just as Alice is about to strike, Nick regains consciousness and launches a desperate attack. Finally, he manages to disable her. Nick wakes up in a hospital bed hours later, his body aching but alive. Beside him are Maggie, Isla, and Max, their faces filled with relief and gratitude. Despite the scars, both physical and emotional, they're together, and that's what matters most. Nick looks at his family, silently vowing to rebuild their lives and never let anything come between them again. Make sure to like and subscribe for more notifications. Until next time, see you soon.